My name is Lindsay Manzo. I was introduced before, and you'll see another name up here, Heather Griffith. And she is my elementary component. She is our K-5 math and science curriculum specialist. And everything that we're doing up here, we're doing it together. And we're differentiating between our grade levels, and I'll talk through a little bit about how that's happening. All right, so let's sort of set the stage. We heard about what SECO is doing statewide. We look now at our pre-service teachers. We just did. How are we helping our pre-service teachers become really strong, ambitious science teachers? The reason that I'm speaking today is because I'm now working with our in-service teachers. Some of them have been teaching, I'm finishing up my 24th year. Some of them are, pushing 35 years. Science teaching looked a lot different. None of us, very few of us, we never learned science in this way. So my role and my job right now is, how do I start to help them make this transition? And there's an article that just came out in Educational Leadership, and there was a quote in the top of it, and I literally just read this yesterday. Doing more STEM, as it has been done in the past, will not save the world, and having the humility to know that is the important first step. We cannot keep doing things the way that we were if we're really looking at preparing our students for future jobs and as future citizens. That one just sort of struck me as sort of this ultimately our why. In a sense. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share the model of professional learning that we are using at Westerville. I'm going to go through the why, the what, the how, and then so what and now what. And all of this has just started this past year. A lot of it was building the plane as we were flying it, because we had this opportunity in Westerville to all the curriculum specialists were able to offer actually credit, and our teachers could come and take the courses, everything in-house. And it would be very practical and ready for them to take that. So why did we choose this topic? We know that we are in the shift. That's what we've been talking about here, to move to this ambitious science teaching, to move to, I call it ABC learning, activity before content. We are done standing up there giving notes and then saying, okay, let's go do this lab that's going to demonstrate exactly what I just said. We're beyond that. We are making the shift from our students just learning about science to figuring out science. And my teachers hear me say that constantly. How are you shifting from them learning about to them figuring out? I'm always asking that question. The other thing is that we've been really talking about the science and technical practices. It's a little bit of a challenge when you are in a state that you can't officially adopt NGSS, but there's also, we know the practices, doesn't matter what the name is you put on it, the practices are universal. So that's was sort of my entry point. And so the other question that I'm constantly saying is, how have you been a scientist or engineer today? My goal before I retire, it's gonna be a while. And there's going to be a sign above every classroom, science classroom door, where, you know how the kids, they run and they hit something or they run up and touch the sign or whatever. I want it, we're not going to work for the elementary stuff, a little bit lower. But I want them to be able to walk out of every science class and go, that's how I was an engineer today, or that's how I was a scientist today. I really want them to have a poster. This is just one of the illustration. Where, how were you a scientist or engineer today? And being able to touch it and tell this is why. And to really see what that means. So that was sort of our entry point. The other thing here, we do know there's a huge body of research supporting 5D learning cycle, explore before explain, what I call ABC learning. Our district also with HQSD, that has to do with licensure, evaluations and stuff. We were also looking at more ways to involve formative assessment to be able to show how it was informing instruction. And then our K-5 recently adopted Mystery Science, which is an NGSS aligned product, and 6-8 will be adopting in a few years. By that time, those third, fourth, and fifth graders, those are going to be my sixth, seventh, eighth graders. We need to keep this going. High school, you're a different ballgame because all of us teach, we get very discipline specific and we get really defensive of our discipline. But through K-8, where we're still teaching life and physical in every year, I want that to be seamless. So that's part of my goal. That's why we chose this. You don't need to read this by any means, but this is, I asked my teachers at the end of the course this spring, I said, they had to finish the sentence. Science instruction today, differs from instruction 10 to 20 years ago in that. Basically, this teacher did the best job of even going, no more reading film strips, no more film winding, and like, wow, this has changed. So that quote from their evaluation just really sort of struck me as this is one of the reasons we're doing this. So what do? We did a hybrid 10-week course, K-12, two grad semester hours with Ashland. The whole point was that it was an integration of both content and pedagogy. We had everything this spring. We had a kindergarten teacher and we had an AP bio teacher in the same group. So we had the full stretch. The entire thing was framing the learning around the science and engineering practices, instructional sequence, and formative assessment tools. One of the things, and I think Lisa did a really good job when she was showing at the end, there are all these things that teachers are trying to learn how to do. If our in-service teachers, you already have enough on your plate. You're teaching, you're going to IEP meetings, you're coaching, you're whatever. What I realized is we have to do this in small chunks. We cannot just say, we're going to go do ambitious science teaching. We have to pick little components at a time and focus on those. Let them get accustomed to that. Let them integrate that piece. Then they can add another one. So the other part of this is that we were constantly practicing what we preach. Even if it was a sort of a drier kind of topic, we found a way every single time where there was activity before content. Even if it was, I have these cards or these scenarios and I'm moving them around and I'm going to draw some conclusions about it. And then that led us into our discussion. So we wanted to make sure that that was always happening. Here were our driving questions because, we needed a driving question. We didn't really have a phenomenon. The phenomenon for us was, okay, you got to change this. So our driving question, how do we help students shift from learning about to figuring out science? I probably have said that a million times this year. And then those other three questions were sort of the three components of it. How can we uncover students' misconceptions, eliciting ideas? And a large part of that component became our elementary teachers are really focusing on that, so we wanted to make sure we built that in. Why is sequence critical? And then how can you help students become scientists in the classroom every day? And those are the SEPs, science and engineering practices. We were both synchronous, we were asynchronous, and then I'm going to talk about what was happening behind the scenes. So for our synchronous learning, we have professional development days, but then we also met in person after school. Very first meeting, we started out with what's called the Science and Engineering Practice Circus. And I have to credit Leslie because she did a course, I think we did last year, 2 years ago?
The last 2 summers.
Okay. And I had jumped in on that course and we started to get exposed to some of these things. I'm like, this is what we need. This is what we need. And since then, as it was. So I started pulling all of these resources together and thought, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to make it. We're going to walk talk. So we started out with basically activities all over the room. And they had to go around. They could do the activity. Then they had to try to figure out which science and engineering practice was this an example of. So we did that right away. We talked about the different functions of the various science and engineering practices. You saw that wheel. That picture is something that I have here in my pile. One of the ones that we constantly used. There it is. Because I said, we are not talking about scientific method. They do not want to hear scientific method. Francis Bacon was great back in the day, but know better, do better, right? He didn't know any better. So we need to do better. And constantly referring to when we were doing any activity we were doing, we were looking at these middle sections here, and I don't have this up on the screen, but it's what are we trying to figure out? How are we going to do it? How do we keep track of the ideas or the data? And then what does it mean? That is that's your scientific method. That's what we need to be doing. That's what our kids need to be doing. A lot of resources too, if you're not familiar with California Academy of Science, they are phenomenal. Their stuff is excellent. We did a lot of, there were some different activities with moon phases. There was 2 stories that the teachers had to read before they came in. And one of them, it was a very direct instruction on eclipses. The other one was very much more like ambitious science teaching, activity before content. And they came in and we had all these sentences on the table. And before we even talked about it, I said, I need you to put those sentences into 2 groups. That's all I said. They started to realize that there were sentences that were describing old school versus new school of thinking. So that would be an example of how we even did that before we even started that activity content piece. We played NGSS dominoes just to help get us familiar with it. And we did take some of the standards that were applicable to us that were in NGSS, and we started to really talk about it's the 3-dimensional piece, the science and engineering practices, the cross-cutting concepts, and the disciplinary core ideas. So they had some time too where we were doing that as groups, and that was one of the things that the elementary folks were they were doing anyways. The other thing, this was a perfect, again, this year, just it fell together. It says Paige Keeley with the Keynote. Let's go. And we were already like that was right where we were. I know. It's like this. Yes, I felt the same. So we really started looking at formative assessment probes and how are we using these in HQST? Because the whole point with high quality student data, when an administrator is doing an evaluation, it's about how are you using data to inform instructions. That's what the conversation is. It's not just what data am I collecting and here it's in a chart. It's how am I using it to inform instruction. So we started modeling and we were starting our sessions with different ones of these depending on our topic. We even made it so there's a bunch of per books, but as we started using them, we came up with a template so that we could just always make them as half sheets for our kids. We also did it in Google Forms. Everyone we were using, we made a template Google form because Google Forms are awesome. When the kids put in the first answer, you can show like the pie chart of what everybody picked. You can go back. I had a teacher, she's awesome. She took all the explanations. So they were in a spreadsheet because they came in through Google. She took a highlighter, printed it out, took a highlighter. It was able to find the trends. Lots of people think this is happening, but that's a misconception. Ooh, they're getting it. So she literally had it highlighted. End of the unit, she had the students do the exact same thing. They could not wait to see the pie chart. The kids wanted to see the pie chart and see how it changed. So this is other stuff that we did when we were together. And finally, our last one, we focused on building the network. The way our professional development days fell, I had another in-person session at our professional development day, but the teachers, their homework literally for that, they had to bring a friend. We said, you got to find somebody and you got to bring it. And we literally modeled everything that we were doing. We started out by doing a penny activity, or actually even before they got there, anybody that had signed up for the session had to answer one of the probes online. We looked at the data, we showed them how we were using it. They played with the pennies, all the stuff that you just saw. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What kinds of questions could you be asking? All of those things that you just saw is what we did during this PD. And then we ended it with another approach that was very similar so they could start to see how we have some teachers, I can't give the same thing, they already know the answer. I can't use the same question before and after. Okay, we can, but whatever. we looked at how can we find similar ones so we can still see if that conceptual understanding is there. So we did all of that, and then we had a panel discussion with the participants. And the people that they brought with them or the other people that just showed up were just randomly asking them questions. And it worked beautifully. Some of the things that we did throughout all of these, again, gallery walks, what do you notice, what do you wonder? We did a lot of SEL check-ins. So which fish are you today? You know, we always started with something just, so, you know, something like that. We used picker wheel, we used Mentimeters, we used all kinds of things. And the whole point was these are examples of how you can use these tools with your students. Because I was adamant that we were going to watch. The asynchronous piece, you can see, and I have, I did actually bring the books. The primary book that we used was Instructional Sequence Matters. There's a 6-8, there's a 3-5, and then I think my 9-12 is sitting over there. Honestly, even for high school, we stuck with 6-8. The front matter is all the same. What varies are the way they do those examples in the middle. So we did reading and all of that kind of thing with this, but when it got to the middle section, I was like, if you're not teaching physics right now and you're teaching bio, don't read the physics one right now. You got better things to do. So we really sort of pieced through that. We used a lot of Paige Healy's probes. We were obviously looking at those. We used, there are a number of articles, and it's amazing. Like I said, I found the quote in that same issue of Educational Leadership. This is April 2024. Look what it is. Leading for a new vision of science teaching. So as these articles were coming out, we sort of embedded them into the course. So lots of resources there. We did a lot of modeling in terms of types of questions that you might be asking. So these are, you don't need to read this. These are just different examples of some of the ones that really made them think about the reading, and they, you know, because we were also trying to really show that you need to raise the depth of knowledge. Okay, so this is the behind the scenes piece. And this is my, just like me. Thanks, laughing, because I'm anally like organized when it comes to color coding, linking, it's perfectly formatted. So we had a master planning document, and every single thing is linked into it. We literally just saved that tab, and Heather and I, every single thing, even the emails that we were going to send to teachers, we wrote them in there so that we could collectively do it. Oh my gosh, it made the second time around so easy. Very, very easy. We also had an interactive agenda. Every single thing the teachers needed was in the Google form or in the Google document. Everything was always linked, so they only had to find one thing. I've had people be like, you get some track. So we needed one thing. That master planning document, that was really for the facilitators, the interactive agenda. That was for the participants. So the reason these are coming up is because the other book, Elena Aguilar's PD book, she actually spoke yesterday with one of the ESC programs. This is called the PD book. This is phenomenal. I love it.
This meeting is being recorded.
A lot of great ideas that, like in terms of planning our PD and making sure our PD is high quality. The other thing that is also sort of my baby, and I do some stuff with Ohio State also, and this is where we developed this, is the collaborative integration plan. I do not have time to have people read chapters and write me a 2-page reflection. I am not going to read that reflection. No way. What we ended up doing is we grouped, I intentionally grouped, so you can see at the top, it says Kent and Jenny. Those two people, there's the dates that we met. Yellow is in person, white is not. And these are your questions and your reflections, and they both put their things on the paper. They put everything there. So even when we got to, they were putting pictures right over there, the picture in the bottom right. Before we started talking about 5Es, we did a sort of all these things, and they had to take the picture before, then they were reading about it, and then they'd take the picture after, like how they moved things. So these are just some of the PD tricks. Even this would be one of the articles was promoting learning for all through explore before explain. The question is up there, and then articles raise the intersection of driving and guiding questions, describe 3 pieces of evidence that support that statement. So again, trying to model constantly, and then we would creep on them on the side and like write little comments or things like that. So really that was the piece that was truly collaborative. It was a mix of the participants and then also us. So this ended up being like the graded work kind of thing for the course. So again, just sort of some tools. You can see how we had everything. We color coded our boxes when we wrote emails, so we could say, hey, purple email's going first, then the green one, then the blue one. We had it down. There's our timeline, don't you look at the date. And then those are the days that we only met 5 times total. And then again, you don't need to read this, but this was the feedback that we got. So they wanted a part 2, and you're gonna have to do part 2 next year. Just a lot of variety. So that's sort of the so what, and then the now what. Will be a 2.0. Some of it will come from ambitious science teaching, because we have to do this in small chunks. All we did there before was stuff related to how we use the probes, how do we make sure that our science, that we're using science and engineering practices, and then explore before explain. Couldn't have said and our learning sequence. Here's where we're going now. These are going to be our questions. We are still keeping the same driving question. It's not going to change. How do we shift from learning about to figuring out? Driving question for 2.0 is not changing, but the smaller guiding questions underneath, we're now going to be looking at how does eliciting the ideas inform the learning progression. Before we just wanted to see how is eliciting it informing your instruction, but now we want to do the learning progression. Lisa mentioned that. How do we help students make their thinking visible? That's the modeling piece. And then how does the sequence of learning activities actually support sense making? So those are sort of our components that have come from a couple different books that we're going to focus on for my 2.0 view. I didn't choose these, they did. So that was all into that. That's it. So that's what we're doing, like in Westerville with our in-service teachers.
I guess that brings us to me. All right, yeah, I know. One laugh and randomly you'll have 5 minutes doing an hour and a half. To kind of give a perspective on how all of this fits with what's going on at the department. And I just want to start out by saying I'm so excited about all of this because I feel like after my 40-some year career, some of this is all starting to really come together. We have a long, long way to go still, but I feel like at least a lot of people are rowing in the same direction. I can remember as far back as the 60s, some of you may be able to too, and we had a lot of initiatives that were good things, but they were tiny pockets, right? And so I saw many of these pieces all throughout my decades of career, but now, we see math doing the same kind of things that science is doing. We see all of this research coming in front of educators and them really kind of understanding, hey, this is the way this works. So, this is the forward. Let's see it. Okay. Great. So we are now, as you all know, the Department of Education and Workforce. So that's really putting an additional emphasis on the workforce development side of things, which I think is really good for this kind of work, because this kind of work really is supporting that, right? It's not just feeding a bunch of information to kids and getting them, to pass a test. It really is giving them some skills to go out there and do something. We've talked a lot about the scientific and engineering practices, and those really are workforce skills. So this fits right in with the kind of priorities that we have now. We, of course, have a big focus on literacy, but part of that literacy is background knowledge. And if you read the science of reading and the research on that, you'll see that having content knowledge is one of the foundational pillars of literacy. So that's what science is, that, right? And so I think we can leverage that to do more with science, particularly in those younger grades, where we sometimes see them not getting. Of course, the scientific and engineering practices are one of the 3 dimensions of NGSS. I know that people mentioned earlier that we are legislatively not allowed to directly adopt the next generation science standards. However, those science standards, just a little history, if you're not from the science world, they're based on a framework, a study that came out in 2011. It's called the Framework for K-12 Science Education. And NGSS grew out of that. Well, Ohio developed our science standards off that same framework. So they look different, they're structured different, but we still value the same things that are in NGSS. So when we did our latest little tweak to the standards in 2018, we really tried to put more emphasis on the scientific and engineering practices. So even before this ambitious science teaching and some of these more recent things, we at the department have been trying to emphasize those practices very heavily. During the 21-22 school year, we did our whole virtual meetup session on that. So we each month emphasized one of the practices and provided professional development around that. And so all of these things you've been hearing about today are very student-centric, right? They relate to the world around them. So these other things like student wellness and the whole child and making learning relevant and stuff, all of that does that. And more specifically on the science team, we have 3 key components. We want to incorporate the scientific and engineering practices. I think that is just foundational, right? And this idea of investigating real world phenomena. And then we really have a focus also on trying to do something particularly at the lower grades where they're not getting science. And they're so into it at those particular grade levels. You may have heard that the department is coming out with these rubrics for evaluating instructional materials. And they're not just for science, we have them for the, math, fine arts, all these different things. They're slated to come out next month, so you'll get to see the real McCoy there. We're looking at good instructional materials. And that's very important to good instruction. But as we've been thinking about and talking about today, you can have the best materials in the world. If you're not doing high quality instruction, then you're not going to get it over the finish line, right? So we do want high quality instructional materials. And for science, we don't have any of those things except ones that are aligned to NGSS. Because of that, a lot of districts have been adopting NGSS materials like Lindsay brought out. And so even though the legislature says we can't adopt that, it's a local control state. So the schools are just going to do it for us. So we can't mandate that from the State Department, but we see more and more. And these are big school districts too, Cincinnati, Cleveland, as well as suburban schools like Westerville and so forth. So we'll soon be NGSS here in Ohio. It just won't be written down on anything that comes out of our department. That's all recording, and we'll it's out 10 days out. Not see just the table of contents to the science rubric that we want people, educators, to be looking when they're adopting materials, but also even to be looking at the materials that they're using right now to see how well they're aligned with our priorities. We'll look at the priorities that we have here. The nature of science, that's the practices and the other components of the nature of science. Of course, we want it to be aligned with the content, but scientific discourse, phenomena, and problem driven. So everything you've heard from these other people today, we are 100% in support of. And when we start thinking about the different like instructional methods that are out there, there's all these different things. There's STEM, there's PBL, there's personalized learning and all of this stuff. But really all of these are supported by what you've heard about today with ambitious science teaching. I loved Lindsay's ABC acronym, that was really good. And so I wanted to just end up, having a little time, right? Okay. What time is it? Okay, perfect. I wanted to talk a little bit about curriculum-based professional learning. And you heard it from each one of them, actually. They're engaging educators with the materials that they're going to be teaching. Right, so this is what Lisa was doing with her students. They experienced it as a learner. Our department our office is currently doing a book study around, or just finished up, I guess, the same exact idea. Educators need to experience what the students are going to experience before they go out and teach it. This is the same thing that MMR training is doing in Math World. And it's so important that you have that. And so we're really trying to emphasize that to districts that, you have to wear that student hat and really dig into those materials before you're able to do this, especially since so many teachers were not taught the way we're now asking them to teach. And that was brought up by these other folks as well. So that's great, curriculum-based professional learning, but every district isn't going to get that. And in science in particular, we have lots of people that don't have a curriculum, right? The district is asking the teachers to just cobble together or pull from whatever or design their own or whatnot. It's ambitious science teaching. It's kind of does it in an agnostic way, right? Because we are immersing educators with that student hat kind of thing in the modeling process, the questioning process, engaging with all those practices. And it doesn't have to be tied to specifically amplify science or whatnot, because all of those good science programs all have those same components. So I think if we can reach educators with this kind of professional learning, it will apply to any curriculum that they're going to have and use that or something. And so then they were like, oh my gosh, like they're in groups and they're doing all this stuff. So I love all this. And I love that we're all on the same team and moving this in the right direction. And maybe all of you guys can be our advocates too, with things that we can't always necessarily do, like advocate for policy and stuff like that. But
So as our tradition at OMSC, we have invited a panel of our various state entities to join us to kind of get their perspective on things dealing with the topic that we had for our keynote. And gratefully, who is the past chair? So that's moderator at panel discussions. Yay!
It's another job to get for 2
Greg, would you please introduce your panel?
Yes, thank you, Nan. You can see the names of our panelists, and if you're here in the room, you can probably see our panelists. And I'm hoping you can see us reasonably well if you're at home. And I will introduce myself, and we'll just go through the row here, and then we'll let John, the remote, introduce himself. And before we do that, I'm going to just try to flip to the next slide with the right device, maybe. We're better together. And so one of the things about the Ohio Math and Science Coalition is it's really a science, technology, engineering, mathematics, computer science, education organization that we're trying to support all of the various STEM disciplines. And we heard mostly a science perspective earlier. It's sort of science and engineering standards with reference. And so in our panel, we also have the perspectives of technology and mathematics, including computer science. I doubt that all of the organizations that are represented on the panel are listed here. I think there should be at least one computer science organization that may be missing. And as time goes on, we keep adding more partner organizations, and that's a good thing. And so most of the panelists are representatives of one of these organizations or a sister organization. And so I will try to go backwards with the slides.
I think I clicked on Zoom.
Anyway, my name is Greg Foley, and I represent the Ohio Math and Science Coalition. And to my left and your right is
Heather Woodledge, Ohio Consultation for Mathematics.
All those technology. And like some government rules of each community.
Just changed our name.
and then John, if you could unmute and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is John Dutton. I am the president of the Computer Science Teachers Association of Ohio and a teacher at MC Squared STEM High School in Cleveland.
So we need to get John's organization at least added to this list. I pulled this image from one of the webinars that the organization. I'm going to give a brief overview and intro, and then we're also going to hear from Paul and Heather, and then we're going to open it up for discussion, and we're all going to be discussing this. But we have one presentations. What we're going to do now is give you an opportunity. We talked about some of these things over lunch, give you an opportunity to think about, share your thoughts, and then we get a discussion about the ideas that were brought up this morning. A little more food for thought. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. So thinking, communicating, doing are centerpieces of inquiry-based education, which you can trace back to Confucius and Socrates. So it goes back to ancient times. And so history. AIM stands for Guidelines for Assessment and Instruction in Public Education. GAIS similar guidelines for assessment and instruction in statistics education. And then it any of these would amount to doing mathematics. And so since our panelists can't see the slides, I'll try to tell them like in the mathematics education field that we're hiring is the idea of rigor, which is students use language to communicate effectively. So the panel this morning talked about discourse and communication. The way that we know what students are thinking is through saying. So you really sense of reassessment conception, but that that they understand. This is zero cost. Bolo, because Texas connection, but actually, in memory of Uncle Ross, you can see his pictures were of Bolo time. It was his standard. So Harold Fawcett taught at the lab school at Ohio State University, which grew to preeminence during the American Progressive School movement launched by the legendary educational philosopher John Dewey. So John Dewey was one of the U.S. educators who's instrumental in approaching this kind of practice that we're trying to move. That's not as catchy as ABC. That's explore before explain. Fawcett had his students write their own book. So we had some pre-service teachers developing curriculum. This is kind of the ultimate curriculum development where the students are writing their own gem. Then Uncle Ross a summer program that I didn't know this until last year, that it's really started off as a teacher program for in-service teachers that we did at Notre Dame University, started in 1946. In 1957, he got this wild idea to invite some students in so that he could model the teaching for the teachers. And he decided to heck with this teacher training program, we should just bring in the students. So in 1964, he brought this program from Notre Dame, Indiana. So I have you see the dates there. There's some tours at the University of Chicago, but otherwise from 64 to 2018, every summer, kids 7 to 8. So, experience that as a graduate student. It was also a practice to have graduate students in the academic program. I'd say to take the same class as these young teenagers. And she took it over, and then recently Jim Fowler has taken it over. Think deeply about simple things. So giving students mathematics. 2 times 3 is 6. Oh, 6 must be a composite. So simple things as the basis for doing deep. So I'm going to do that. But words from all and together and then we'll discussion.
I just want to start with, getting involved in doing things, as Steve's talking about, and definitely the panel talked about, is very important. Having the students actually do things. That's certainly been one of the things in my area over the years. But there's still always that part of getting the teachers to facilitate that conversation and have the students explore how they're doing it. So that's something that I appreciate. Glad it's involved in science kind of thing. And also a lot of what I was looking at, the PE kinds of things you all talked about are very important in providing teachers a chance to get together, try it out, modeling what you're doing in front of them. Like I also just mentioned, is very important. One of the biggest things that you mentioned is just getting them to talk to each other. And then hopefully carrying on that conversation afterwards through network. Sometimes we can facilitate that with groups, but so many electronic ways to do it now, hopefully they're doing it on their own too. There's also a big thing I've seen in workshops in our area is helping provide them with tools. In some cases, that's physical tools in order to do lab activities and those kinds of things that maybe their district isn't on board with yet. To take that back with them and helping them see that. Find that feedback, and then, one thing the teacher educator was always kind of the best thing would be to have student teachers that are out teaching. They would come back and talk about how their teacher said, okay, forget everything you taught at the university, we're going to tell you how to do it right. Well, in some cases that's true. Some kinds of things, the behavior management, that kind of stuff on the ground stuff is really helpful. But the curriculum, a lot of times, it's like, well, wait a minute, they're teaching this as they taught before this. So, these are all great opportunities to change them.
Yeah, it's great being here today. Sorry. So I've had a very busy week. On Wednesday, and the modeling and reasoning course has come up a number of times today. I was actually with Steve Miller at Summit County ESC facilitating the 8th day of professional development. And I know that, that's come up here a lot, giving teachers the opportunity to experience it as a learner, to model and embed the pedagogy into not just lessons and activities, but how do we become that facilitator of learning. So it was really cool. Part of that, so it's 8 days, 4 days in the summer and throughout the year. So it's ongoing professional development. There's the meetups where teachers come together and just share how things are going. That's been really great. I was facilitating one of those last week. And one of the teachers said, well, I'm starting to NMR up my other classes. And I was like, that is awesome. I'm NMRing it. That idea that when kids are engaged, they're experiencing mathematics, they're becoming critical thinkers and problem solvers. It's what we've been preaching and teaching for so long, but to have it really start to grow. And I know this was one of the questions when we talked about MMR specifically last time, but how do we get that MMRing it to all of our, not just high school classes, but now looking down towards middle school and getting kids involved and engaged in mathematics. I don't want to get too much into this, but yesterday I was with part of the team that was looking at Ohio's plan for mathematics. And the two big foundational pieces of that, standards of mathematical practice, what we want our kids doing, and the 8 effective math teaching practices. And of course, the taking action work really supports that too. So all of this, it's amazing and awesome to me to see the parallel to what's happening in science, what's happening in mathematics. And honestly, I said this to Leslie over lunch, but I spent some time this year working with elementary teachers, and the explicit instruction for the science of reading, they're talking at children for 90 minutes, 120 minutes at times, and they hate their lives. Like, they are so frustrated. They're like, it is terrible. Can we have fun in math class? I'm like, yes. Engaging and problem solving and talking and playing games to, practice fluency and things like that. So I love that the science work and the math work is so complementary. And then hopefully administrators start to see, wow, these kids are really engaged in what's happening in this classroom. And it might be a little loud, it might be a little messy, but kids are really achieving. So I guess those are more reflections on the question, but it's been a great week. So I'm glad to hear people today.
Before we open this up to Q&A, I would like to hear if John has something to share since he was great. So any thoughts before we go to the discussion questions that we have now.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's very difficult to hear. Were you asking me to participate at this moment?
Yes, sir.
I couldn't. Okay, great. I'm ready to do so. So I think from what I heard, that the computer science follows directly with everything that Heather was talking about, everything that Paul was talking about, where we are looking in computer science to figure out, the students are figuring out, how do I solve this problem? And they are having a metacognitive moment so much of the time, and that leads to both virtual and physical models of problem solving. And there's a lot of really great physical computing devices that students can use in order to have really rich interactions with computing and be able to solve those problems, that very human problems, very real ones. And we find that, you know, students are really more engaged in their math and science classes when they're able to build digital models of whatever's going on in those math and science classes. So computer science can act as in partnership with a lot of other classes, especially when it comes to inquiry. When I was a science teacher, I loved doing inquiry-based labs, and in the computer science world, it's really easy to support that. It's a lot more difficult to have something natural-based. That's much more human-based, any sort of inquiry-based lab. But that's the general direction we come from, is in supporting the modeling piece.
Thank you. So you see the three questions up here for you. So anyone questions, comments? Right, two panelists. We have kind of a math heavy panel, so we want to hear by that perspective, everyone's perspective. So, and questions.
That I really, as it's always talked about how education and how we changed a lot of our practices throughout time. I mean, think about education, we're still a lot of ways similar to what we were 50 years ago. And I think that we, as content specialists, really need to work with our leaders in our buildings to think about and be creative in how we build and schedule the day to make these possibilities a reality. And I don't know if those conversations are often brought up or thought about or talked about, but if we value something, we have to make sure that we make time for it. And that it's not a question, just a comment. I think that this is valuable work, but if we're not prioritizing it and making it something that we value and making sure that it is time for our kids to be able to do a lab and experience it in the manner that we talked about this morning, even experience mathematics in the way that Mark is allowing students to engage in mathematics. We have to prioritize that not only through teaching our teachers how to value it, but also making sure that our educators, that our school leadership is valuing it and the time it takes to make that a possibility.
What the point you made was about school, well, the main point is about school leaders. How many of our school leaders, how many building principals have experience in math, science, and technology, and engineering, and computer science as learners from an inquiry-based learning perspective? You can give them opportunities to do that.
So at Seeker, we have that conversation a lot, and I told Heather earlier, like part of the frustration, especially at the elementary level, is like science, they're told you have no time for science, or the time for science is now integrated into your 90-minute math block because you could do them together, but there's 120 minutes of reading a day where kids are ready to The teachers don't like it, the kids don't like it either. So we are actually presenting at the Ohio Elementary Administrator Conference this summer to plead our case because, yes, we can reach elementary teachers and they can buy in and say, science is important and I'm gonna start using these things and doing these. But when they're told there's no time, or you have to like, you only have a little bit of time for math and add science to that, we have to get to administrators too. So we are gonna plead our case and we're gonna give them experiences because I'll be honest, probably maybe close to half of my administrators, and I was a district administrator, were PE teachers. You know, and so their instructional like background is just very different. And so we are trying, our organization is actively trying to get to that.
Yeah, so PE teachers should understand the importance of activities first, right?
Right.
But it's not something they've experienced. Kim?
I guess this is a question for the panel and the group. It's stemming from a comment, just thinking about the idea that even when, and I'm actually thinking of a very specific situation that I'm, sort of working with, right now. But even when administrators, in a case where administrators are really supportive of the kind of instruction that we're talking about, I think that, we've all seen that, many very well-intentioned, often veteran, but not always teachers, they have a really difficult time seeing that there's a problem problem issue, whatever word you want to use, but that the administrators are trying to solve. So like there's this real genuine question on the part of teachers' minds about what is the problem here that we're trying to solve. And so I'm putting that out there. I have my ways that I think about that, but I kind of wanted to pose that question to the group, like how the panel thought about that or anybody else.
I'll kind of jump into that one. I think one of the things we need to do together is identify the challenges that are from a policy or a traditional way of thinking about school, not just among administrators, but among teachers, among parents and caregivers, among legislators, among stakeholders, school board members, and anticipate what are the policy issues that arise when we make subsequent changes in the way we think about instruction. And do some thinking about what kinds of evidence, what kinds of things do we need to do to help move people forward in their thinking. Because we know one of the first questions, I think one of the first questions building administrators and teachers now may be thinking is, how are you going to convince me? How are you going to provide evidence that changing my teaching practices is not going to negatively impact our scores on the state test, for example? If teaching differently, we need to rethink the way we evaluate student learning, grading, for example. That takes some working together across disciplinary and anticipating what the issues are and begin thinking collectively about how do we respond to these, such as scheduling. What impact does it have on our schedule?
Part of that in the beginning is coming up with a set of goals that you're actually going for in your higher education. Without that.
I think the huge component is just to say, oftentimes what we're currently doing isn't working. And realize and come to realization, like we've been doing this the same way for years and it's still not working. So it's okay to change. Change is difficult, I think. And I think that's why we're so hesitant to do it, because we've always done this in the past. But are we really evaluating our practices and ensuring that we're meeting the needs of our scholars and our students and designing our day to allow for our teachers to be able to provide students with those opportunities?
Two quick comments. One, I really appreciated the MMRing of other, because I think we're talking about practices that don't just exist within a very dedicated specific course or something like that. We're talking about things that should permeate all of our science and or math courses there. The second comment related to, you know, what problem are we trying to fix? What are we trying to accomplish? I can't help but reflect back on the needed math project that I've been involved with for a number of years. It started with a conference that brought together, and this was for math folks, math educators, technical educators, and business and industry folks. And the business and industry folks were asked to provide examples of math situations that occurred for entry-level technicians in manufacturing that were challenging or giving difficulty. To a person, these business and industry representatives from a vast array of different manufacturing scenarios, from biotech to I can't even go through all of them right now, but would start out explaining to us mere math folks about their new employees saying, well, they know the math, they just can't, and then they would go on to explain an application of mathematics relevant to their job setting. And to me and a couple other folks, this is an oxymoron. They know the math, but they can't do anything with it. They don't know the math. They need to. And I think that's a higher level of demand that you're doing. You're not just learning the math to pass the standardized math test, or you're trying to learn the math at a level that it persists and it has facility beyond the educational system down the road here. So you're looking for something a little higher than picking, you know, is it A through E on the multiple guess test at the end of the week?
I'll go further. Ross will go further.
That's second, please.
The reason they're complaining about this is because we don't teach math in math class. We have math class that does its thing, and then we have mathematics, which is doing something completely different, and they're not the same thing. All you gotta do is go out and start talking to anyone on the street, and they'll tell you that our math class did harm them. They don't like math. They can't use math. They want to avoid math. That's harming them. All of us in here, we view math and science as two sides of the same coin. They support each other. They push each other. They work together. And we have spent forever pulling these two things apart for our education of these two things. The MMR class, about the first class we've had a long time that says, no, they're glued together. Even at what we would call the general education level, which we would call the lower students, they can still do this. Everyone can think about the science and the mathematics. I was watching the stuff that we were presenting earlier, drawing things, connecting it. That's the math. That is mathematics. You're using mathematics there. They're glued together. How in the world did we get these two things so separated that no one can learn either one? It's just amazing.
Here. I was just thinking when you were saying, sharing, they know the math. The problem is math isn't something to know. What they need is not to know the math. They need to understand the math, right? They're not understanding what they're doing. They're applying some algorithm that they memorized or something. So that was sort of back on this and not responsive to what you just said, but like we gotta focus on, and science is set, right?
So I guess just bouncing back to like that is, and I think this is not like that comment or that variety of comments that you shared, Rod. I don't think that's lost on a lot of, you know, high school and, you know, lower grades teachers. And then it's the question of, okay, so we hear that. And so how do we help to make these actual changes then, which what was shared this morning from our science colleague, just for some great examples.
Well, we talked about, I heard some comments about we need to let this filter down to the lower grades. We also need to let this filter up to higher education, and not just for pre-service teachers. So the work that Lee and I are doing to try to promote the quantitative reasoning, general education course around the state of Ohio, where math and real world are connected with critical thinking and the courses about reasoning and communication. So we're trying to MMR higher education. Right? We're trying to promote the same kind of work for gateway mathematics courses, so that it truly is a gateway and not a gatekeeper. Mathematics has been, it's like, okay, we want to, the engineering college, it's like we'll use calculus as a weed out course. Those who can't practice calculus 1, we'll get rid of them and we'll be left with the stronger students. So rather than it being a doorway, a gateway, an entree to do science and engineering and be successful in making health choices and financial choices as adults. So it's combining inquiry with practical applications, and making math and science real for students.
I can tell you, we're great at building that filter. We are fantastic at building this filter here, and we have proven it. It's also caused us a lot of problems. There are plenty of people, the people that get through that filter don't need us. We tell them what to go do, they go do it, and they're fine. But there is a hell of a lot of people that can easily go into these fields, but they need the teacher and they need the class to help them. And we're not, we're filtering. So we need to change from this filtering to something that's going to help these people through here. Hopefully this K through 12 plan we're coming up with is going to at least give people permission to try and do this.
Do people know about that K-12 plan?
Not yet. It's a secret right now.
Now, what I just heard over lunch, though, from a very reliable source, is that those of you that sit in the room are allowed to share things, as long as it doesn't say do not distribute on it.
Oh, share but not distribute.
So 3 of us in here are on the advisory committee for ODEW, and 1 person is a staff member for the right? And so we had our last meeting yesterday. And gave a bunch of feedback, but of course we don't know what's in the final report yet. That's why they don't want us to distribute it. But separately, we could probably, give you some of the bullet points, I suppose, or something like that. So what the big categories of ideas are.
And how it leads to today's issues. Is it in line with what we're talking about?
Nancy has the copy.
From my perspective, hopefully this is gonna tell us, stop with the skills as the goal. That's not the goal. The skills are the things we're using for further goals. We're slowly manipulating as best we can on the wording to tell people, get off of that track. There's a different track we need to be.
And we're struggling, Lee and I are struggling with our colleagues, bless their hearts, around the state, who teach freshman level mathematics. And one of the big fights is quantitative reasoning versus college algebra. It should be the default general education course for students. Who needs college algebra? Nobody. If you're going to be an engineer, you better be taking calculus as a freshman, or at least pre-calculus. If you're going to be a scientist, you better be taking statistics and calculus, or statistics and pre-calculus. So if you're undecided, University of Cincinnati, our colleague Ricardo Buena has found that undecided students who take quantitative reasoning and decide to become STEM majors do just fine, thank you very much. In fact, they do better than the kids who've been turned off to STEM by college algebra.
You have plenty of statistics that say if you come to college, you place at the college algebra level, and your intention is to go to calculus, you're not going to make it. It doesn't. The college algebra trigonometry does not prepare you for calculus, mostly because college algebra was designed as the course that people took when they weren't going to calculus. And now that's the course we're using to prepare people for calculus.
I think the huge issue is just like, it's very at the higher ed level, at least in my experience going through college. I feel as though it's taught in a way that it's not to context. So, and I think it transfers when you try to become a teacher, when you're a first year teacher, you're trying to walk in your classroom, you're trying to teach these kids. And actually, why does this matter? Why do I need to learn this? And nobody's able to answer it because you yourself was not taught in context of why this content is important. And the one methods class or two methods classes you have is not enough to help you be able to effectively communicate why I need to know this.
And that leads to our problem in higher ed, which is we have a QR course, which we have decided is the better course for students. Or we decide, we built the course because we think it's better than college algebra. But faculty don't want to teach it. And so we can't offer the course because our faculty don't want to teach it. So we're not even running courses for our students. We're running courses for ourselves. How did we get there? This is crazy.
Can I ask, Lee, like, what are some of the, I mean, I can imagine, but what are some of the reasons that you hear for why faculty don't want to teach?
Where's the online homework system? I had a grade. Wait, what? I don't want to do that. I'm not at the board lecturing. I got to go around and talk to my students. I'm not comfortable doing that. Wait a minute. I don't have the answers in advance or open-ended questions. I'm used to telling people how to get to the answer. I'm very uncomfortable teaching the course. However, in my experience, every single person that will finally say, I'll try it, and we support them, they end up liking the course.
That's the same exact roadblock to MMR, like, and that's why the training for MMR.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Sorry, I said that was the exact same roadblock we've had to the implementing MMR. And the way that we combated that was with 2 years of PD. Because when we would see it in action, people were standing at the board trying to lead an activity that should be hands-on.
Activity first, ABC.
Right.
Activities for, so,
Right.
before content.
When we first implemented our QR course, I designed and wrote the course. So I said, I will do the professional development. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab some of our faculty. They're going to come and take my course. We have students in my course. And as they get more comfortable, I will ask them to do things in the course. So first they stand at the side in their chairs, they watch me go around, and then they would get up and talk to a student. And then 12 weeks later, I said, why don't you do one of the, you do next class. I won't come. You run the class. All of those people left understanding the course, what their role is. They became very good QR teachers. And the administration said, don't ever do that again. It costs too much money.
Some college administrators do support QR.
Is that John Crooks? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes. There are over 2,000 students taking QR at your college during the 2022, 2023 academic year. That did not go unnoticed. So I hope that you can get others, other of your colleagues to embrace and support the content in the way that you have.
We will try.
I would like to hear a little bit from those who were at this meeting we keep hearing about yesterday. And what is the direction in broad strokes of what you're trying to do? So I don't know, maybe someone can try to summarize that, and maybe Brad, I'll call upon you to try to summarize that succinctly and let those chime in.
So I should get my cheat sheet?
Brad, I have 14 slides ready.
Oh, you have 14 slides ready to go?
For Monday, for the supervisor's meeting on Monday, yes, it's the same one.
They'll look exactly like what we showed you at OMI on Friday.
Fantastic.
What those?
But you can pull up-
2024.
Yeah, and so just for understanding, the reason the plan can't be shared at the moment is there's edits to be made, like Nancy just showed me the front cover. We missed an edit on the front cover.
I noticed that until last night, and I looked at that and it says October 2023. We are not living in the past.
So there we go, and.
I think it would be enough just to share that there are categories of objectives and strategies under those objectives. And if you hear what the big categories are, I think that'll give you a sense of where things are going. So objective A is what, and I shouldn't use the letters because they might be reordered. Okay, so it's facilitating shared leadership. Wait, where's the short version of this? Hold on. So it's shared leadership. It's oh, here we are. Expand access to professional learning, increase use of high quality instructional materials, implement research and evidence-based instruction, and strengthen partnerships to support mathematical learning. Right, so it's a broad swath of the kinds of things we need to be doing. And of course, one of the things the advisory committee kept saying is, and we need money to do, right? One thing that is close to what we're talking about here is this increased use of high quality instructional materials. One challenge we have out in the schools now is that many schools don't have adopted curriculum, or we kept using the acronym HQIM, right? Well, many schools have LQIM, right? Exactly. And so, you know, how can we help them? And so we need to, well, one is to encourage them to actually adopt some high quality instructional materials. But one of the big issues is how many teachers in those situations think their job is to be curriculum developers, think they're, or curriculum collectors, right? Where they just buy things from teacher pay teachers and download a thing from Engage New York and, oh, here's a good one. And that is so, and they do it on their own rather than even in groups of other teachers. So there are big questions about how to, sorry, I got on my soapbox. Big questions about how to increase awareness of what the high quality instruction materials are and how to use them and how to adapt them for your own students.
Panel this morning. Sorry for ringing in my ear, is that along with these high quality instructional materials, you need high quality instruction that is aligned with the intent of those materials. And that's where the professional development is so critical.
And that's, I would argue, the PD is critical because
Yes.
I've seen high quality materials be put in the hands of teachers, and when they're not given the PD with how to make these instructional shifts, they get frustrated. And then they are like,
last year's worksheets.
Yes, they pull out last year's worksheets because they're not taught how to teach this way.
That's right.
They're just given these now online resources. Maybe the kids have a printed workbook, but they're frustrated too. So to me, you have to follow up with the PD.
It's the same thing at the higher ed with not doing the quantitative reasoning. You know, they haven't experienced it. And so they're not equipped to do that. They have to have that student hat experience where they walk through the materials. I mean, I don't see any way around
Brian's worried
that.
about getting on a soapbox, but I just live on the soapbox.
Your soapbox might be bigger.
So
than
we've been meeting for 6 or 7 months doing this thing. And on the first meeting, I said, if you're gonna start talking about what to do with mathematics, you need to say what mathematics is.
Yes.
And now our second one, if you're gonna talk about mathematics, you need to write down what it is and it needs to be simple. They gave us the reading initiative version of this, and then there was reading is this. I was like, you see that? You need to say mathematics is this and it needs to be simple. the fourth month, fifth month. We met in February and they said, one of our goals for this meeting is we would like to take these things we said and mathematize them. And I said, you don't have a definition of mathematics yet. How are we supposed to mathematize it when we don't know what math is? And that generated finally a sentence. Here's what math is. Brad has been working on to fix this damn thing to get it to be what we want it to be. But that's what we're up against. We're up against, everyone knows what mathematics is. That's not the question. That's the question.
Yes.
We are teaching the wrong thing.
On the high school, the HQIM cohort, and they said that high school math teachers, 50% of high school math teachers do not use the school adopted curriculum, and they spend an average of 5 hours a week looking for materials.
And you know that,
Incredible. 5 hours a week, which is their planning period. They're probably looking for stuff to bring to next period instead of having long-term goals.
and what's so interesting about that in some cases, those would be high school teachers who are actually at schools that have fairly high quality materials and don't like them or don't think they are, you know, and so they're looking for things that are not good. And then on the other side, there are teachers, probably maybe not as many, but anyway, who are at schools that have adopted low quality instructional materials and are looking for things that are better, you know, and yeah, it's just.
It's more than just getting it into their hands.
Yes.
And more than having professional development. Sometimes you need an administrator to be an administrator. Tell people that this is what was adopted. This is high quality material. This is the state of the art. Do what you're supposed to do and have consequences. Because I've got teachers who tell you what page he's going to be on for the next 8 years until he retires on any given day. And he knows that because the last 8 years, that's where he was. And the principal knows this. When they went to hire my replacement, one of the questions was, how do you deal with a teacher who is non-compliant? Well, the principal is the one that has to do something.
But they have to know what it is supposed to look like.
Yeah,
They have to know
This
enough.
principal in particular actually does know. He was a former math teacher.
So one of the things that's come out here is this organization can work with other organizations for that administrators are part of the Coalition of Rural Appalachian Schools. I'm sure there's other organizations. We need to get on those programs. We need to have a panel of science and technology folks talking about this vision. And we need to get them engaged in doing an activity and experiencing it. Not just talking about experiencing it, but actually doing it.
Just, we're trying to learn from each other. So a friendly suggestion to the science folks that are trying to incorporate AST into a variety of science courses. Do it subversively. Put your AST chemistry thing, put the AST in 1-point font below the title or something like that, because you've heard great things about MMR, the professional, the way it's been implemented and stuff. How come MMR isn't the math course of choice for 84% of students in Ohio public schools right now? It's got to be sold to other folks too. And because it's not a, hey, my parents took this in high school class, or my counselor doesn't recognize this as a course preferential to Algebra 2 or something like that, it has a marketing problem sometimes. That you know, the advantages why I should take this over recognized standard traditional whatever curriculum, it is not well understood sometimes. So just a thought.
Bill, you've been, yeah, sitting here listening, of course, I'm a strange person in their group. I'm an engineer by training and spent a 52-year career in. As I sit here and listen, number one question I'm going to ask all of you is, do you practice mathematics in your life? And clearly have a friend who wrote algebra textbooks. needed to have a new refrigerator in the house, in their kitchen. Went out and bought one, was delivered. It didn't fit. What happened to measurement? It's not funny. You know, this is the point. I think that many of you, I appreciate what you're doing and how good mathematics has improved over the years as I watch schools. And from the school board point of view too, as I said, 22 years I was on school boards. But I think you have to live the discipline that you're teaching. And if you don't, because what you're talking about here today is a lot of what's happening is based because you have experience. You're not 2-year people, you're 20-year people. And that makes a huge difference. In my own case, I'm now solving problems, believe it or not, at 85 years old, that have to do with the math and the science that I learned a long time ago, but I didn't appreciate how they fit together until I've lived a lot of these things. One's a science project because I've got a well system and a control system of that well that's not working. I finally figured it out. The other thing is the math problem I'm doing in turbulent flow because I was in aviation and dealing with turbulence going into jet engines. And that derivation involves algebra, exponents, Taylor series, integral calculus, differential calculus. And I couldn't have done this at age 25 or the age of 26 when I got out of grad school. But I can do it today because I have the experience as to see how things fit together. So what I'm really saying to you is you can't expect a new teacher out of college to be able to do some of the things you're asking without having some of that experience. And I'm often think about back when it was, but some of the things coming out of Japan, where a teacher can't go into the classroom until they taught for 6 years under, or some number like that, under an experienced teacher. So I hear what you are trying to do. The question is, can you really do it if you don't have the experience, or find a way to pass on some of that experience so that they have something to build upon? And to what Brad was saying, and some of you who are familiar with our committees in OMSC, the things you were talking about, and now you're part of our committee, but when we did a survey of the top 100 schools, using the performance index at the Ohio Department of Education, we looked at the 9 characteristics of high-performing schools. No, it's not one characteristic. They're doing 7 or 8 of these characteristics. And it has to do with the leadership, the community, socioeconomic, status. You can look at the schools that are high performing, and it's very clear what is going on. And so when you start to talk about, we also looked at the bottom 100. The bottom 100 have very different characteristics than the top 100. They're inner city schools. That already starts to tell you something. Single parents don't have time to spend with the children. You look at the high performing, the parents are deeply involved in the students' educations. So I'm covering a lot of points here, but I think the point is that it all comes together and you can't lose sight of any one thing, or it is, as somebody said, we're having troubles making this work. And the only way you can make it work is to integrate, which goes back to the early days of, Nancy will remember this, Peggy, of OMSC. And we had a chart that we made with all the arrows going all which way, random flow in what was happening in education. And what we said we're aiming for is to get all the arrows focused in one direction. And of course, that's what you're working on. And we're still working on it for a while.
So I very much appreciate the conversation that we are having. Because each of you have different thoughts, and everybody feels very safe in sharing their thoughts here. And that's very valuable. And we come from different walks of life. My background is not the same as Rod's or Peggy's or Brad's or Heather's or anybody's. So we bring these different perspectives, and to have that discussion, I think it's really valuable. And I hate to say that, you know, it's Columbus on Friday, so we could have this discussion for a great period of time, but Bill started talking about his committee, and which was terrific, because I'm going to have you just expand on that just for a minute or two. And then Peggy and Frank can talk about theirs, and then Brad's going to talk about what's happening with the state of licensing again. So thank you all for your great participation, not only the panel.
Just quickly, I have a quick presentation. I had to put some slides together. Who should I send it to put up on the screen?
Me,
Les.
I'll give you mine. Okay,
Thank you.
so we do have, for those of you who are new to the game here of OMSC, we have 3 different committees. And they are led by different people on the executive board. And so Bill is the legislative committee, and he has been working with a core group of people after we surveyed superintendents and looking at schools from pre-pandemic to today. So Bill, just like a minute or so we can move along.
So in our efforts, we're trying to decide, are there things that we could learn by looking at the ODE performance index data for all schools, all 602 school districts, public K-12 public school districts. So we try to remove things like a private school and charter schools. And so Rod, Peggy, Brad, and Michael are on the committee, and we've been looking at the data, putting it into big spreadsheets and trying to look at the characteristics of what makes for a good school district. I told you that it's quite clear that of the 9 characteristics, it shows up in 2-3 publications that characterize high performing school districts, that as we look at that, we can see that that's really, they really apply. If you can figure out how to break that down, that would help. If we could take the problem that's improving Ohio is not our high performing districts, it's to bring the tail up where we've got a number of very poor performing schools. And that's going to take something very different to even get them to the mean, if you can ever get them there. But bottom line is, there's this subcommittee, and we're pawing through data, learning things, and then trying to figure out where we're going to apply it with the legislators, and then with some other thoughts we've had today. Peggy and I were talking. So if anybody wants to join up with us and muck around, as I call it, mucking around in data, you're welcome. It's spreadsheet analysis and moving columns and rows.
Thank you. And Peggy, do you want to go next?
Sure. We did kind of a bad advocacy partition. So we've got these 3 committees on advocacy, and we've got one for the legislature, that's clear. And we've got one for professional organizations, and that's sort of clear, which leaves advocacy with the public, which is kind of everybody who's not the legislature or not the professional organizations. We have 2 main activities, and we are also hunting for members. One is that we have 2 or 3 webinars a year. And I'll tell you right off the bat that as this wonderful panel talked, I thought, my gosh, we've got to say this to the parents, not to other science teaching. We've got to say this to parents, to the public. So expect us to contact you. So we do webinars 2 or 3 a year. And then we write. Don't expect to get rich or even be published, but we write letters and we write thought pieces. And then we hope to do these with newspaper editors, not necessarily the Columbus Dispatch, but your local county paper. We would like to be in contact with school boards with some of these ideas. And I assume that after we're finished with this section and we start talking about the certification, my gosh, what a great thing to get the information out. So people, parents understand how important it is to have, not people who are not just have certificates, but are actually knowledgeable about the grades that they teach. So we want members, we do those things, and I can't think of anything else. Can anybody who's on that committee think of anything?
Don't think Janet is on.
No, she said she had a thing this afternoon that she wouldn't be able to be here. So really, it's a fun committee. Tell them it's a fun committee. Okay.
So if you'd like to join them, she'd be happy to have you. And notice she's the chair of this committee, but Bill has grabbed her for a dual person.
Paul Tully and I have a group, and it's pretty much the group that you saw present, plus the ones from this morning. The different professional organizations that represent math, science, technology, computer science, engineering around the state. And based on what I heard today, I think what we need to do is get this group and figure out how we can advocate to other organizations, especially administrative organizations, principals, school boards, and so on, and get the word out about what constitutes high quality STEM education, STEM instruction, and the idea that activities and real world connections are essential. And so, we present a panel 3 times a year, but we need to expand that and promote what this organization is trying to promote to other organizations that might not be savvy about.
And OMSC was founded by something called the Council of Presidents. And it was mathematics and science organizations in the state of Ohio back in the 1990s. And at that time, I was president of Ohio Math. And we were asked to form a coalition and to include the deep and interesting leaders. Over time, we have had more business and industry leaders in attendance as opposed to one business. Bill is a stellar, he has been here forever. And I can say that because I've been here forever from the beginning. And so
representative from NASA here today. That was wonderful.
yes, and so it's, you know, it is, the more perspectives we have, better. So the committees are very interesting. They do some interesting work. And if you would like to be part of one of the committees, let us know. We'd be glad to add you to the email. And now, Brad, because he is on the survey committee and brought up the grade bands, last week, I guess. And we said, how can we change that agenda? And since I'm at, you know, Peggy's there, and Bill's there, and I'm there, and Rod's there, and we're like, well, there's 4 of us, but the 4th is there. And Michael was supposed to be there, but he got called, you know, when it's your last few days of the job. So we gave him a bye on that one. But anyway, so we decided collectively that this is a very, very important issue. And so that's why instead of breaking into committees, we decided that we would be ahead of the game if we heard about this and what we might do.
So I should have said, when we had our committee meeting last week and proposed this for the agenda, it was entirely hypothetical. And then the next day, I found out that in fact, there was going to be a hearing on Tuesday this week. So on Tuesday, I actually gave testimony, and I want to just give people a quick sense of what all this is about. And Leslie very nicely connected me to her computer, and I've got this little clicker. It's great. So House Bill 33, which was the budget bill last year, and was passed and signed in June of 2023, made some changes to licensure. And the highlighted bit is what we want as license issued under blah, 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 blah. Shall specify whether the educator is licensed to teach pre-kindergarten through grade 8 or 6 through 12. So those are the two licenses that are established in law now. But notice it does say the changes to this grade band specifications shall not apply to a person who holds a license already as of, December 2023, yeah?
Just to add in, pre-K 8 would be all subjects. With the second one, the 6-12 is you would have a content area of designation, just to kind of further give the clarification of what the law says.
Thank you. But now, notice, by the way, it says the licenses shall be issued any after December 29th, 2023. Now, what I thought that meant when the legislation was being proposed a year ago is that the educator preparation programs would have to change immediately, or there'd be some sort of grandfathering that, you were in 4.9, we'll just call it a K8 kind of thing. I thought that's what would happen, because that's what the legislation seems to say. But now, since then, I've learned that there's a phase-in process that involves writing and adopting rules for the new licenses. That was actually completed in April. And then there's writing and adopting program standards. That's planned for 24-25. And I got this from Krista Maxon. Has Krista Maxon ever come to one of these meetings? Krista Maxon is a, okay. So she used to be at what was it, Central State, I think? She was Shawnee State? Okay, thank you. And then left the state and then came back and took this associate vice chancellor of P16 initiatives. Anyway, so educator preparation falls under her. So then it's writing and adopting the new program standards. That's planned for the following year. And then we can ask the higher ed institutions to revise their educator preparation programs, and then they'll be submitting, reviewing, resubmitting, approving, and then there'll be deadlines. And the students who are already in programs that were previously approved need to be grandfathered in some way. So Krista's off the cuff sense was that we might still continue to offer 4.9 certificates through maybe 2030, right? Because of all the whatever, okay? So, but this is an enormous undertaking, right? For both for the colleges and universities and the state education agencies to manage all of this, right? So, but then Senate Bill 219 is what was proposed, and that was what I wanted to talk about, was this possibility. Sorry. But notice it does some cross out, and what it's going to do there is change it back to pre-kindergarten through grade 5, grades 4 through 9, grades 7 through 12. Does this actually? Oh, okay, great. I thought this might have a laser pointer. It doesn't.
I think the battery is like so low that it's
Oh.
the circle is the laser, but
No, okay, never mind. Okay, so anyway, so it restored the previous grade bands, and then it has this sort of exemption that they may teach outside of the designated grade band by not more than 2 grade levels for not more than 2 school years, but it can be renewed, sort of thing. There's that, so you have.
That's already in effect now.
Yeah.
It's like that went into effect October 3rd, 2023. What this does is puts like a 2-year limit on that, where locally you would have to renew it.
So usually the legislation, as it appears up there with the strike through and cross out and underline, strike through and underline stuff, indicates that this would be new, but so apparently it's not up there in the correct format.
Not necessarily. I think it's right, because what it's doing is it's adding a period where you can't just indefinitely, if you're 4.9 cert, you can't from now until forever, your 6th grade teacher is now going to teach AP stats to 10th and 11th graders, because it's 2, it's 9th grade plus 2.
Oh, okay. Right, okay.
Do the math.
So, yeah, so.
In any case, so at the hearing, and unfortunately, well, actually, there's enough there. So the Senate Bill 219 is sponsored by Senator Catherine D. Ingram who's from the Cincinnati area. It's going to restore those grade bands that were established in 2018. Of course, the grade bands before that, remember, were pre-K to 3, right? pre-K to 3, and then with a possible add-on of those things. So April 7th was the first hearing with just sponsored testimony, just from Senator Ingram herself. And then this hearing that was announced last Thursday and happened on Tuesday, 10 people gave oral testimony, including people representing these organizations, and then faculty members and students from Ohio State colleges and universities, including me, from Ohio State. And Anita O'Malley presented as well. She's from Youngstown State, and she presented data from a survey that she and Gabriel Matney and other people did around the state to find out what our current pre-service teachers would have done if the grade bands were pre-K to 8 and 6 to 12. And it was about 25% of the students say they would either go out of state or just wouldn't do teaching at all. So there are some issues there, right? Then the rationale for the switching to 2 grade bands was because of the teacher shortage. So the claim here is that, well, maybe this will exacerbate the teacher shortage, right? Never mind that the teachers will be less well prepared. And then there was some additional written testimony. These people didn't get to testify and didn't get to speak there, but I just want to point out among those was the Association for Middle Level Education. Do people know these folks are in Westerville?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know they exist in Westerville, right? So anyway, and so I've been in contact with them and they submitted written testimony. So my questions for you now, or do you as an individual want to influence this conversation in any way? Does OMSC as an organization want to influence this conversation in any way? Now, one thing that's interesting, of course, it's the BASA, but the Buckeye Association of School Administrators. Did I get it right?
Yep.
So BASA has been the organization pushing most for this. Colleges and universities have been pushing against it. Teachers seem to be mixed.
Pushing for the 2.
BASA has been pushing for the 2.
Right, okay.
Right? Many professional organizations and colleges and universities that we know about would be pushing against the 2 grade bands and trying to restore the 3. Teachers are mixed. And I gave you some indication of how students are mixed. So with that, let's just have a conversation, and I have 11 minutes left, is that right?
Yeah, well, I'll give you 2 of my closing minutes so that we have 13.
Okay.
Define influence.
Well, there's lots of things we could do, right? The first thing would be to send a letter. Oh, and what's really, what I should have said about the testimony itself is there was the testimony was quite powerful. And Krista was watching it on the, maybe I shouldn't say this. Don't tell anybody. Krista was watching on, because it was streamed and it's up there on video and you could actually watch it.
And all the testimony is also online, like you can download and read all the testimony.
Right, and some of the testimony is quite powerful. I had one of my students, she did an amazing job, that's great. So, but there was a moment in the testimony when the chair, Brenner, said, now Senator Ingram really wants to restore these grade bands. And well, I don't, and maybe she's right, maybe I'm wrong. It's like, what? So I think there's a chance, and then he asked me some questions about separating the words license and certificate. And I didn't understand really what he was saying. So I got to follow up with him. But what I mean by influence is so the first place to influence, I think, is to get the chair to hold another hearing. If he gets enough letters, and I think it's fair to guess the reason this hearing came very quickly is because of emails that Gabriel Matney had sent out, and Chris Eric, is that Eric? Chris Irick had sent out saying, hey, this is going on, send a letter to your senators, here are the members of the education committee. So I think that may be why the first hearing happened, the second hearing happened. So I think we need to just keep applying pressure to get them to have more hearings on this. And so influence could be just sending letters, influence could be going and actually meeting with them personally. And then outside the education committee, send letters to your individual senator and representative and try and push it there.
And I know there were people who tried to submit written testimony, but the timeline was very short. So, for instance, Jim Schultz spent a good amount of time preparing a letter. And they submitted it and they said, oh, sorry, you're too late. And he, you know, that email came out and you didn't have much turnaround time to respond.
Well, that's true, but I mean, as I said, I found out.
We're gonna do this tomorrow, and it was due yesterday.
Right, well, I mean, as I said, I found out about this on Thursday and then I had to sort of.
So if it's gonna happen again, it could happen at any moment.
That's right.
Well, but,
And it can't wait and say, oh, a month from now, maybe we can have a meeting. It's gonna require expedited action.
Yes.
Immediate action.
Is OCTM doing something, Heather?
About this in particular,
Yeah.
just, I mean, we'll continue having conversations, but Gabriel sent that out to big list.
Gabriel sent his message, but it wasn't
Correct.
an OCTM message. And
And we haven't
Gabriel's,
sat collectively like this to come up with a formal position on it.
right,
I got something to hold on, probably.
yes, Anita, I think, forwarded a letter from OML.
Yeah, to the.
Yeah.
As a higher education person who's a member of OML, I'm sending this to
I
you.
think she sent it as an individual,
She sent hers,
identified as a member of OMO.
Well, but she also emailed, I mean, just emailed people, like email
Email
us,
people,
yeah,
yeah.
right.
it is, Gabriel said in one of his, emails that 1,000 letters from individuals are better than one letter from an organization, and that is true. But
Absolutely.
one letter from an organization plus 1,000 from individuals is even better.
Or 5 organizations and 10,000 individuals.
Exactly, exactly.
And I mean, going back to like, Greg, you were saying Jim Schultz didn't quite meet the deadline, but I mean, just echoing Brad's point about we can always send an email to every single member of that, just a personal email to every single member of that committee, which I've done on multiple occasions for things.
Yes.
And to our own representatives, yeah.
And one thing to know, one thing, Gabriel mentioned that he had to cut his letter in half because it was too big for the
Yeah, I
online
think
form.
it's 600 words, I think it's the.
But there are direct emails. There's some links that whatever that's called, the news organization, has lists of email addresses for everybody. So we can connect to those and find the direct email addresses so that we don't have to be constrained by that online form. Yes.
Sorry, the last few weeks, I thought I read something in the Plain Dealer and I could be dead wrong, but it said something along the lines, and of course, one doesn't know whether this is just somebody's thinking or whether it's at the state level. But you mentioned the difference between licensure and certification. And there was some thought, and I could be dead wrong, but you'll want to make sure that I am wrong, okay, is that they were thinking about doing licensure for someone who has a bachelor's degree, no education. And certification then was certifications we know.
Well, that seems to be what Chairman Brenner is toying with right now. But one thing that's interesting is in the Ohio Revised Code, pay attention to, right? It says a license shall be a license in one of the opening sections, the glossary term. A license shall refer to any permit, license, certificate. Right? So the words license and certificate around the country are essentially synonymous, and different states pick different words. What Brenner has as an idea is to separate the two words and say the license is just broad K-12, whereas the certificate will be for particular things. What problems does that solve? I haven't a clue.
Well,
Right.
it was so that we would have more people available to teach. That's what I read.
Well, I mean, we already sort of have that with the substitutes. They can just put a substitute in the classroom. There's a bachelor's degree, so, and a background check.
But this wouldn't be a substitute, this would be your regular teachings. That's what, whether I read that or whether I bringed it up. Did somebody else say?
I
that?
read the article, yes.
You read it, thank you.
When was that article?
I'm gonna find it.
Because it could have been a reporter who was there it could have been exactly the question Brenner was asking me. There, it could have come directly from that.
Yeah.
That's gonna be confusing, because there still are people that have certificates from
Yes.
before we had
Yeah.
licenses.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, I have a permanent certificate.
As I said, he's trying to separate two words that have been synonyms.
Do you ask for us to come up with 3 or 4 points that we can either use as a collective or as individuals? Or given the time, what should we do?
Well, I mean, one thing is just to consider. I can forward information as I get it and say, here's another opportunity for something.
It was a master's degree, I just found it. It said it's what is it, 168? Yeah, it's a master's degree.
For
Any
A
master,
license or the,
no, just to teach, so. So if
So
you
a
have
master's degree will automatic teach?
Yes.
What
so
about
any
military service?
master's degree.
Was military service in there? I'm sorry, what did you say?
No,
Yeah,
I'm
and that wasn't there in my-
sorry, I was being facetious.
I get another, license. Done.
Okay, I'm gonna give you another 2 minutes.
Madam Chair, MOS.
Something any one of you can do is you go to the legislature website, you can follow any bill, just you
Yeah.
sign
Yeah.
up and they'll provide you all the updates. It just makes it easier once you kind of hear like what Brad's talking about or a couple of the other bills that we've heard thrown around. Like, follow them, and it's a lot easier if you're getting the updates, kind of know where they are, what they say. So you can share what you think about it. If you like it, say so. If you dislike it, say so.
You could follow the
This is what
committee
it says.
So the one
It
thing
says
that I
allow-
wonder, given time frame, if you would have some kind of bullet points so that if people are interested in writing letters, they could go to those bullet points that you provided everybody. And then I wonder, if the board made a decision and sent a letter as the board, we wouldn't need the entire membership. We would just say the board feels as opposed to the membership feels. And for the coalition. And then we could do that part email. I mean, but not because we don't meet again for another, we meet the 2nd Friday in June. So if we want to do that quickly, if you would do the bullet points, and then we could have as a board, some kind of thing that we could say the board, if you're all comfortable with that, you know.
And then we would send this letter to the membership, and if they wanted to use it, they could.
Yeah, we
If they
say
wanted
this
to
is what is
reference
being sent. This is what is being sent. So
Right.
if you're all okay with that, would you like raise your hand? And anybody opposed? I know there'll be some abstention.
You don't want to put that.
There will be State Department
Abstention.
abstentions.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
And are there any votes against? All right, so that's what we will do if Brad will lead the charge.
So, if I want a message sent out to the entire membership, I send it to you or send it to Peggy.
Peggy
Okay,
is the keeper of the list.
thank you. I will do that. And I'll put in,
And you can copy me and her, so we'll have that, and then the board will.
Okay.
Okay, and it is exactly 2:20. I say thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Our next meeting will be October 4th. I'm not sure exactly where, but it will be.
And in person.
That was